now they find this plane wreckage, they find the men's bodies. I guess that's good closure for the families because they can now at least inter them somewhere back home, wherever they came from, other than the ninth person that was never found. But now, in terms of the plane, what happens to that? Do they just leave it out there in the desert and mark it as, found, or?
Well, what happened is, that's a good question. What happened is the Air Force scavenged what they could from the airplane because the way it landed, it didn't just, blow up and
Right,
explode, hitting the ground. It kind of skidded into the desert, broke apart into two pieces, the front and the back,
right,
with both of those pieces still intact, just broken
right.
apart.
Yeah, it sounds like
And
it's right down and then just literally hit the ground. Boom, probably slid for a bit and ended up, yeah, just breaking in half.
right.
Point.
So because the airplane was not just completely destroyed into tiny little pieces when it
Mm-hmm.
hit the ground, all the equipment and everything inside was still in good condition. They said even the guns, when the recovery crew was there, the guns were still operable. The guys were in there; they were shooting off the guns. That
Wow.
they still worked, and so many pieces of the plane were scavenged and were were used as spare parts for other aircraft.
Okay.
And now here's where the paranormal in this story comes
Well,
in.
outside of the fact that 8 men from the crew died, well, all nine, all of them died, but they have 8 recovered bodies. Yeah, that's pretty impactful. I wonder if they would have survived had they stayed on the plane.
They probably actually would have. I mean, maybe not all of them because
Right. Depending
you
on
see
where
the
they were.
photographs, and it's a pretty messy impact. But
Mm-hmm.
the main structure of the airplane was still intact, and I'll bet, yeah,
Yeah.
they probably would have survived if they'd stayed with it. But again, the issue is that they thought they were over the water,
Yes. Yeah.
which is why they bailed out.
Of course. Yeah. You have better chances. So now we've got this plane. It's been found. And is it still the U.S. Army at that point that's in charge of scavenging the plane?
No, at that point, it is the United States Air Force
Okay.
as we know it today.
Okay. So now they're the ones that are going to, they're taking, salvaging and
Yeah, they're
using.
salvaging what they can.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as I say, here's where the paranormal comes in. Um, Good point that you made that okay, you got 9 deceased men. I've not heard any paranormal stories at all regarding the crew.
Okay.
Everything that talks about the hauntings from this airplane comes from the actual airplane itself. And
Interesting.
it's these scavenged parts that were
Oh.
then put onto other aircraft. And it's interesting that
Hmm.
every single one of these other airplanes that received a piece of Lady Be Good ran into incidents and crashes. Every
Oh,
single
no
one.
way. That's
And
wild.
there was one airplane. It crashed into the sea somewhere. I'm not sure what sea it was, but it was a crash into the ocean, and very few parts washed up onto whatever shore it was where this crash took place.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the parts that washed up was from Lady Be Good.
Really?
Oh,
That's
wow.
There's another incident that took place in the 1970s, which is very reminiscent of this story. and there was an L-1011 aircraft called Flight 401 from Eastern Airlines in the
Mhm.
1970s crashed in the Florida Everglades.
That's right.
And exactly the same thing happened is they salvaged pieces of the wreckage and
Mhm.
put it into
Into
other
other
aircraft.
planes.
And the
Mhm.
same thing happened is that all these other aircraft that received pieces of Flight 401
Mhm.
started experiencing supernatural occurrences.
It's
Yeah.
Hmm.
interesting, right? Because we always associate these kinds of things with people. It's like, oh, it's haunted by the spirit of a person. But
Not
I
always. Yeah.
no, and that's just it. But I'm often intrigued by stories like this one because you have this residual effect within the plane. And that I feel like the fear of the crew, not just that it's their first mission, but the whole after effects, and including to the point where they have parachuted away from the plane, hopefully to survive. They don't even know. I mean, can you imagine? You're it's the dead of night, it's pitch black, you're out in the middle of nowhere, you think you're over the Mediterranean, so you're preparing yourself to land in water that, really, how are you going to survive that? In general, you might survive an hour or so, but the weight of that parachute is going to suck you down into the water. And so if you can't get out of your release harness, all of these things that must have been going through their heads, and then to find themselves on, terra firma, but now they're in the middle of the desert, and it's daylight and they realize they're nowhere where they thought they were. All of this probably, just propels itself. And even though that happens after the fact, it's still part of the story of the plane. And so it's one of those, again, like we spoke at the Steamboat Inn with my experiences with the sounds of the Civil War happening in the distance. Is this a residual thing? But then, do you think that residual energy? And I'm going to ask you both this question, and if you can answer me in your own manner, like Rachel, residual energy.
Yes.
Do you feel
Hmm.
that plane, as its parts are used in other things, that residual energy could cause further accidents on other planes that the parts are put
Oh,
into?
that's a tough one.
Yeah.
I do actually. Yes, I do. I do think that. It's just too much common occurrence of that happening. You hear of it with dolls too, where or even car wreckages where the parts. I think it was James Dean's car.
Yes, yes. I
Um,
did a whole
he had
episode
he
of
was
that on
yes.
the shows I was on. Hmm.
That's right. Where, people's cars have had, they've saved them from wrecks, but people died in the accidents. And I believe like the residual of those parts. But I think it goes further than that. Because apparently people who have heart transplants have visions of the person that the heart belonged to. Like they have that, they feel like a strong connection to the body part that was put into them like a heart
I could
transplant.
see that
So
happening
I
because you're literally
yes,
absorbing someone's DNA when you
exactly,
receive someone else's organ, and that organ becomes part of your body, but that organ had a lived existence in a previous body, and that DNA
yeah.
thing is within all of your entire body. So I can get that. And I suppose in a way with a piece of equipment like an airplane, that there is an almost like an electrical DNA coding, right? An electrical coding that's within
Exactly,
the parts or within the wires and the
exactly.
electronics. And so
It's
perhaps
just
that
I
experience,
hear the phrase correlation doesn't equal causation. I
right?
know we're not
Yeah,
supposed to go along that as scientists, but at the same time, it's too coincidental, for me
right.
to ignore it. It happens too often.
What do you think? Do you
Yeah.
think that that's something too? Like there's a probability of that, that almost that, electronic
I do,
absorption
yeah.
of energy? Do you think that can
I
happen?
agree with that. Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Definitely. Oh yeah.
What's your thoughts on that? Like just in terms of, does it sound
Me?
plausible?
Okay, well, I feel like as a paranormal investigator, I've been to different houses where I also see like a mindset. So people will say, well, my mother used to sit in that chair, so it's gonna be like there's gonna be residual energy, or there's gonna be, she died in that chair. So there's something in their mind about that particular item of furniture that, whether it's residual or not, in their mind it is.
Mhm.
So I find that when I go, like, I try to stay non-biased. They're like, well, you're going to find activity in that chair. Well, sometimes that's not always the case. But yeah, when it comes to residual energy, I think we need to keep an open mind. I think it's all too easy sometimes to go, oh, it's definitely, XYZ. And we have to sort of debunk some of these things too, at the same time.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Ian, in your thoughts, do you feel like residual energy has the ability or I guess, the energy to transfer to another, say, electrical or, just a part, like a plane part, if it's being put in another plane? Do you think that that residual energy can interfere with in this case, the planes that that receive the parts from Lady Be Good?
I believe so. Yeah.
Here's a thought, right? So where are these pieces of the plane kept now? Like they salvaged this plane. Is there anything that people can go see, or is there something on display? And from those pieces, do people actually have any further stories in terms of paranormal experience?
I do not know about any further stories.
Okay.
There are pieces that are available to view. Um, what's left of the wreckage itself
Mhm.
is stored on some Air Force base, I think still somewhere there in Libya.
Oh, okay.
I doubt because it's an Air Force base that you would be allowed to go and view it.
Hmm.
Where you can go and view pieces of the wreckage, and I have personally done this and I've seen them myself,
Okay.
is at the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio.
Oh,
They
okay.
have one of the engines and one of the propellers on display.
What happened was error, human error, right? I mean, what happened to that
Well,
aircraft
a human error
was
based upon an equipment malfunction.
that's right. And that's sort of the difficult thing when we think about it. So I don't think there was any real paranormal or, any kind of curse or anything attached to the plane right off the top. But now we have a instance of a, piece of wreckage. And while there are some interesting anomalies, things happened with equipment that's put into other planes, there's nothing to say that the pieces that currently are out there have any sort of, supernatural curse on them, so
Yeah,
don't touch it because, it's not like the Hope Diamond, right? you know,
exactly.
it's that kind of thing, right? It's kind of I mean, this is an interesting conundrum because human
Mhm.
error, weather, all of these things played into a very unfortunate event for young men who
Mhm.
didn't get to come home. And so there's
Oh.
that side of the story. But there's
Mhm.
also, this added side to the story of these other aircraft that perhaps experienced negative things based on the Lady Be Good